Back to the 3-minute Devar. This week's portion is Parashat Chukat. Chukat begins by talking about the red heifer, one of the most obscure mitzvot of the entire Torah. So much so we are told that King Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, so the one who knew all there was to know about life, all the wisdom of life, there was one thing that he couldn't understand, and that was an element of the red heifer. So we're not going to talk about the red heifer today. We're going to talk about another episode that takes place in this week's portion. That is the story of Moses and Aaron losing their right to enter into Eretz Yisrael, into the land of Israel. The Jewish people are thirsty. They've run out of water, and they come to Moses and Aaron with their standard complaint. Why are we here? We should have died in Egypt. What are we doing in the desert? And Moses, with his humility and understanding, runs to God and says to God, God, the Jewish people need water. They've run out of drink. What are we to do? God says to Moses, this is what you need to do. You need to go to a rock, which I will tell you, go to a specific rock and speak to that rock. And when you speak to that rock will provide the Jewish people with water. Moses goes to this rock, which God tells him about. The entire Jewish people are there standing around watching as everything unfolds. And Moses begins to speak to the rock. However, when he speaks to the rock, nothing happens. Nothing's happening. And Moses sees the Jewish people are getting more aggravated and anxious. They really, really are thirsty. They want something to drink. And Moses decides, instead of speaking to the rock, he's going to take his staff and he's going to strike the rock. And he does that. He strikes the rock, and lo and behold, water gushes forth from this rock. The Jewish people are happy once again, and they have water to drink. God comes to Moses and says, Moses, why didn't you listen to me? I told you to speak to the rock. You struck the rock, and because you didn't listen to me, you've now lost your right to enter into the land of Israel. Someone else is going to have to take them in, and we know that's going to be Joshua. Moses and Aaron both die before the Jewish people enter into Israel. Now we look at this story, it seems very, very harsh. Moses doesn't seem to be doing something all that bad. Yes, God told him to speak to the rock, and yes, he didn't quite listen to what God told him to do, which is not great. But is it that bad that God tells him that he can't enter into the land of Israel? God really wanted Moses should speak to the rock. Rashi, the great commentator, tells us because he wanted the Jewish people to watch and learn. He wanted the Jewish people to recognize that if a rock, which is inanimate, doesn't speak, doesn't hear, doesn't have any feelings or emotions, and doesn't rely on God for its sustenance and livelihood, if it chooses, so to speak, to listen to God, then how much more so do the Jewish people have a responsibility to listen to God as well? God recognized that the Jewish people needed to understand this lesson now because they were entering into Israel. Up until now, the Jewish people had a very interesting relationship with God. Whenever they acted out of line, whenever they did something they shouldn't have done, God comes down on them very, very hard. God whips them into shape. They complain, they do things they shouldn't do, and God sends plagues, literally plagues to the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are under the impression that that's the way they ought to behave, that they are whipped into shape by God. They listen to God because they're scared of what God's going to do if they don't. And God wanted them to see when they enter into Israel, life's going to change. They need to start to learn how to listen to God, how to do the right thing because they care about doing the right thing. He wanted them to act in a good way because they cared about being good, not because they were scared of what was going to happen. When Moses struck that rock, what he showed the Jewish people is that if you want someone to listen, you're going to have to hit them. And if they don't listen, you hit them harder. The Jewish people did not need to hear that message. They needed to hear the message of, we can listen because we want to listen. We can listen because we care about doing the right thing. We can listen because it matters to us to live a meaningful life, not because we are simply just scared about what's going to happen to us if we don't. This was the message which Moses failed to teach the Jewish people, and therefore God said to Moses, Moses, you no longer have what it takes to be the leader of this people. This is true for us too. We have the ability to be good and to live meaningful lives because we want to be good and have meaningful lives, not just because we are scared of what will happen to us if we don't. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom.